One of the things that fascinated me with your work is the idea of the better a automated system is, kind of the worse the human gets. Can we start there, jump straight in? Can you tell us what you found there?
The more we automate, the less the human is able to support that automation. We can look at multiple disasters globally, from Uber's self-driving vehicle accident, where the operator was relegated to a couple different input tasks, but not really capable of attending to the road, to countless air traffic incidents where the automation was doing things the pilot was not aware of. 3 Mile Island, another great example. And even the metro in Washington, D.C., where operators in what was supposed to be a highly automated mobility system were relegated to really opening and closing the doors. And at the end of the day, very little. And then all of a sudden they have to do something. We're not really capable of stepping in. So a few things happen. First of all, as we automate more, our expertise and our skill level rates. We learn by doing. So when the automation does for us, we, in essence, flex that wet computer, the mind, less robustly. Second, we begin to make assumptions about what the automation may or may not do. So some work on automated driving parking systems years ago. The assumption many users made was the system is going to automate parking. Well, it's going to turn on the turn signal as well. So it's just the assumption is the automation is doing stuff that's not clear to us. But perhaps most importantly, attentively, we begin to wander. The automation is functioning and we begin to step back a little bit, just trusting it a little too much. All of these are known factors. But that doesn't mean that automation can't work. But we need to engineer around these known elements to be successful in developing highly complex social technical systems that have to work in safety-centric environments like driving. So I believe strongly automated driving will win over the long haul.
In a time where we're looking from an enterprise perspective into automating a bunch of different processes, right, through AI. Your background is like you come with quite a pedigree. Maybe it's a good idea to spend like 2 minutes on what have you done in terms of academic studies to be able to kind of state the predictions and the different opinions that you have here today.
So I've been working in areas of transportation safety, leveraging AI tools for years, working and strategically using and thinking forward in what AI may be able to solve for over 25 years. I've published nearly, if not over 350 academic articles of a variety of degrees, from op-eds to hundreds of refereed conference and journal papers. Spoken extensively globally with industry, helping them chart strategies in terms of Sweden. I sit in a research advisory board for Autoliv and a advisory board for AI Sweden, which is a national AI center within Sweden. So I've had some deep connections in Sweden for over a decade now. Great innovative culture, fun to work with, and great to visit during the summer. What's interesting here, Johan, is that many of the tools that I worked as a grad student over 25 years ago, leveraging AI to solve problems that were, quite frankly, unsolvable at the time, now solve themselves in a split second using modern computing and modern AI frameworks, which is really fun to watch. But the fundamental underpinnings, really haven't changed that much. Neural networks are still the fundamental foundation of a lot of what we're doing.
And I think from reading might be good to mention as well, you just released a new book on AI, and then we'll get into that soon. But one of the things that kind of struck me from that conversation is that we have a tendency to overestimate the speed in which these transformative technologies kind of have a real world impact. Like the self-driving car has been 2 or 3 years away for 20 years, right? What can we learn now standing in what is still kind of the beginning of like wide scale AI adoption from previous generations of these types of changing technologies, do you think?
That's a great question. And I think that as humans, we are much better at predicting the future than we are predicting the timelines. There are a couple of illustrations out there of technologies that seem to just work overnight. I mean, the iPhone is the one that sticks in many of our minds. But these are rare occurrences. Most of the time, we have a vision of where we'll get to. Jetsons like science fiction is definitely something that I can see us getting to over the course of a century or two. But how fast? Look, is a technological marvel breakthrough occur that 2 decades from now we have flying cars everywhere? Probably unlikely. Although I think we'll see a few by then. Um, More likely, several decades out, if not, years beyond that,
Mm,
these transformations will occur. So when we think about AI in particular, today we're thinking about the fusion of machine expertise with human skill.
mm,
And the blending of humans and machines isn't new. Since the advent of computational systems, the explosion of personal computers, we are using machine intelligence in new and unique ways more and more years after year. AI is just an accelerant on that today. Why? Because we've finally gotten to a point where you know, AI is really useful to the average consumer, the average employee, the average decision maker in ways that actually provide utility. In years past, you might send a team to optimize a process system or optimize a automated driving algorithm, an AI tool, but people didn't feel to see that in the same way.
mm.
Chatbots today have really just revolutionized how we see AI, and it's just the first of many steps along a long and winding path of the seamless integration of advancing AI into our lives. In the book, we talk about it as perhaps, it's today we're living through the modern electric ferry, from the early 1900s when we were thinking about the advent of electricity. I, for one, believe AI today is just the broader peripheral use of electricity in modern sense, and it will continue to grow and it will continue to build from here on out with lots of ups and downs in the technology development and the financial supporting mechanisms that enable companies to invest.
If we assume that the learnings from the self-driving cars and how the human skills kind of atrophy over time, what do you see as the enterprise version of a driver who's forgotten how to drive a car?
That's a really good observation and pickup here, Johan. And I think that is very well known that skill atrophy is going to occur. You can just look at the studies in recent months on neural activity when you're
Yeah.
using chatbot. But I think that where those studies do fail is that it's relegating to the chatbot, and that's why collaboration or co-pilot versus autopilot is so important.
Mm,
That we need to learn to use these tools as collaborators, where we're thinking more about the strategic elements and maybe a little bit less about the tactical elements. But much like driving, we are going to become novices at certain things. So, I mean, let's bring this down to the foundations. Do you want to drive a car without power steering,
nope.
without um, automatic transmissions, electronic stability control? This is all automation. Very simple. Was advanced several decades ago. But as we automate more, our skills to respond to growing situations are going to erode. We need to think about less about the automation equation, more about the driver supports to ensure that we are there when the automation reaches its boundaries,
Mm,
to work collectively, collaboratively, to form a better system. So when we think about today's chatbots, and this is a huge worry about in the educational systems, and chatbots are just a modern embodiment of AI.
mm.
Relatively simple in some sense, but complex in the underpinnings. Um, we're thinking about AI that many people are relegating way too much to. Looking, write me an essay. I'm not learning to write that essay. I'm not building the skills. Other people is my co-author Magnus would say, jamming with the AI engine and going back and forth, thinking
Mm,
about, hey, much like a physical collaborator, I now have an electric collaborator who allows me to iterate more succinctly, more thoughtfully, in new and unique ways. So I think it's how we as a society begin to use these tools. There is one fundamental foundation that we need to remember. As a human race, we tend to be lazy. The average individual would love to rest, sleep, watch TV, sit in a chair. So we need to begin to think about what those guardrails are so we don't become over reliant on the automation AI and we become a partner with it.
mm.
And that's, I think, going to be the hard part for society to wrestle with. We'd love to automate it, people out of work because people would rather go to the islands on vacation. But the reality is, as a human race, we need to collaborate. We need to think. We need to just think in new and modern ways with new and modern tools.
You could say that the car, in the non-self-driving version of it, it's decreased our ability to run long distances, probably, right? So like everything is a extension of some other function. And when we look at how we collaborate with our AI, at least to me, it begs the question: what am I optimizing for? Like, what are the core things that I want to keep? And what are the core things that I'm completely fine with delegating, in the same sense that I have no problem that I use a calculator for very complex math, right? I don't feel that I'm less of a human or less capable. Like, where do you feel that in order to get the right balance of partnership and driver aids, if that makes sense, when you look at knowledge work, for example, what are the do delegates and don't delegates?
That's a really good question. And I don't think there's a right size fits all for everybody.
No.
I think there is a huge diversion among the human species and cultural differences and corporation differences and trust in technology roles. By and large, though, I think that at minimum, today's embodiments of AI are spell check, grammar check, calculators on steroids. I do not think we should be putting work forward, whether that's a simple email or developing an essay or a report, without leveraging modern AI tools for grammar, spelling, and improving what we're doing. Products like Grammarly are great illustration. You don't have to go all the way to ChatGPT to get better sentence structure.
Mhm.
It is not always right. I mean, humans hallucinate. Why would you expect AI to hallucinate? It doesn't understand all the context, but you know what? It gets 90% of it correct. And that's why we're humans in the loop there. So that's the floor. And I don't think there is an organization globally that shouldn't be leveraging tools like this to help employees, students, individuals in their home improve what they're doing, no differently than spell check has been doing for years. The question becomes, for many of us, what is the more optimal way to use modern AI in its form of a chatbot? Some of it is draft something that I want to say that I believe is the right thing, and then use it as an opinion. I'm trying to write an article for this audience. What do you think? How can I hone it? Okay, great. It provides me feedback, no differently than a physical colleague would have before.
Mm.
Yeah, that information is regression to the mean, but it has a good context of what that audience is likely to be. It provides me with value input, but the decision all becomes mine in the end. And one can go back and forth in honing, this could read differently. This could read better. I understand why there's a whole bunch of extra words in here, and I'm trying to speak to a senior executive, which means reducing word count is more likely to get it read.
Yeah.
I for one love using ChatGPT to say, okay, which slides could I remove from a story? I think they're all important. I know they're all important, but I only have 25 minutes with an audience.
Mm.
On the other hand, many individuals suffer from a difficulty being able to ideate, come up with a new idea and think about an approach. So, okay, I now have a problem. I have to solve X, Y, Z. Any ideas I can begin working from? These are fine and dandy ways to begin using these technologies today. I think there's a lot of potential to upskill elements of the workforce. But I think the fast flyers, the highest performers in an organization, are going to accelerate by finding new ways to integrate AI tools into their workflows. So I think we live in a society here today where the folks who are resisting these tools are going to begin to be the ones who are falling further behind, the ones misusing and abusing them, even further behind. Work swap being a major issue.
Yeah,
But the
absolutely.
two groups, either the high flyers that are really trying to find ways to optimize what I can do as part of my work, this small percentage of your workforce that's vital. I think they're going to continue to accelerate, move forward faster than we can imagine. And then I think a huge swath of its workforce is going to get upskilled here. But I do not believe we're going to have the massive job loss that many would like to believe is going to occur. I think we're actually going to find new roles in new ways, much like many technological revolutions in the past. We don't understand the processes we're trying to automate well enough to bring AI in to just automate them. So the reality is that we're actually probably going to create more jobs than we lose. Although given current geopolitical stresses, will frame a lot of layoffs as AI related layoffs, but in reality, they're not. They're just moving segments of the populace around and changing job roles and reducing man count or head count to changing business climates.
If you're a CEO, so what I hear you saying is fundamentally like either you can focus on raising the floor, the worst performers in the analogy of the spell checker, right? Or you can raise the ceiling, like fundamentally build capabilities that wasn't possible before. And if you were to reason as a CEO, what would be the kind of way to a sustainable competitive advantage? Or is it both?
I think it's both. I think some individuals are going to think about new ways and accelerate your organization forward, but I can raise the floor for everybody.
Yeah.
So I expect things to be improved across my organization. That's still, I don't expect the frequency of emails to flow around with grammatical structure problems so people can understand and interpret them. I expect the tone of emails in my organization to be much more professional, assertive. You don't have to think about this stuff as much anymore. Now, are the tools optimized to provide that? No. I mean, look, I love Grammarly. It's a great tool integrated into everything I do, but it's not reframing stuff natively yet from my tone of what I want my professional voice to be. And it's going to in the future become much more personalizable.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we don't all want to be vanilla, but we also can't, maybe you have 100 different flavors you can work from, but that's about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like there's a certain sample ignorance when you start upgrading your text for the first time with ChatGPT and you ask it to refine arguments and this is the target audience and so forth. You see a massive improvement typically because we're all not authors that are brilliant at writing, right? I see two things, and this is just my own experience, that I don't necessarily think that everybody notices at this point, and it has to do with tonality. One thing is that you start realizing after you've done 10 or 5 or something of the same text that it's very repetitive. It becomes very boring. Your own text sound the same, even though like the content of it might change a little bit. And the second thing is that it sounds the same to everybody else. So I think it's a really good idea to start thinking about tonality, like what is truly my tonality, and be aware of the fact that if you're only looking at your work, you see such a little sample and it's most likely going to be identical to everybody else. And it's quite simple to work with tonality. One of the things that I whenever I work with a senior executive or something that does writing, just ask them, what's your favorite author? Who do you want to sound like? And just mimic that,
But look, the same is true for your podcast here, is that you're bringing on different guests to change the tone of the situation, but you're doing the pre-reads, the how do I want my tone to move around. Otherwise, if you ask every guest you have on the same 15 questions, that gets boring after a while.
Yeah, it does.
So that's not success. Success is bringing human creativity into this. And that's where the infusion of, human skill and machine expertise can really occur together. So when we think about what these AI tools can do, right now, only so much. In the future, definitely more, but changing the nature of how we work with technology for the better. We need to really get out of that mindset. As I mentioned earlier, humans are default lazy. That's got to become a non-acceptable answer. If I was a CEO sitting in an organization now, work slop, which is just using an AI output for stuff, really needs to become an unacceptable form of output. Easily grounds for termination. Why? Because if the cost and risk of just asking the AI bot to do something and passing that along as your own, that's just something we're not looking for here. And if the cost of that is severe, people will refrain from delegating everything to the AI. If the cost isn't there, you're going to find a lot of people doing that.
I think you make a good point in terms of work slop and taking accountability completely out of the room when delegating to AI. And I think there's a conversation that needs to be had there. We also have the other side, like the secret cyborgs. So people that have automated stuff, but they don't want to tell anyone because they know that the only reward that they'll get is more of the same work, right? And what's a good incentive structure? Have you found any like really good incentive structures in enterprises?
So my message to a few senior leaders at this point is that, look, we need to embrace in our organizations to think ahead. Traditional academic structure is not going to teach people how to use these tools. They're moving too fast.
Mm.
So give your organization the liberty to explore in exchange for the liberty to teaching. I'm going to summarize easily here for the purpose of this, but give everybody 2 hours a week to play with AI tools, assuming that they bring back what they learned positively and negative to to your organization, so everybody can move. So the lead performers are going to begin talking about things that are way out there that are going to help bring up the floor. But at the end of the day, they have the incentive, much like Google used the ability for early employees to pursue other opportunities and learn.
Yeah.
You're building that incentive structure in your organization. We need to teach my organization within my culture to move faster. So we need to incentivize learning. We need to incentivize unlearning old practices and thinking forward with new tools. And it's not that means your organization has to overnight change. It's just your organization needs to be thinking about how these new modern tools enabled by AI in a lot of cases can really augment and improve processes, save money, expand resources, develop new products, and the like.
Moving back to the CEO and what's on top of their mind, I think everybody's seeing this massive change on the horizon, but we see very different responses. I think most CEOs and most organizations have some very decentralized trials of AI going on at this point. And what I hear a lot from leaders in general is that they have a tendency to see further out on the line the implementations, but they struggle to understand the value for them as leaders. You bring up this really interesting point around the Alta Vista trap, and I think that's relevant to discussion to have right now. What was that? Can you roll that out for us?
The search engine, concept that we had many moons ago in Alta Vista was, we're going to ask this anything, it's going to produce an answer. And I think that's really a great parallel to modern chatbots. Here, years ago, we had the idea of what AI and search could provide, but it took us decades to really embody that. And I think it's a great illustration of, we have some ideas of where the future, whether that's driving, whether that's information technologies, whether that's augmenting our move away from the smartphone to some other smart personal device. We have visions, but the embodiment and execution of that often takes more time than we realize. So I think it's important that as society plays with, as I said before, the modern embodiment of AI in large language models and chatbots, we recognize this is just a stepping stone. And these tools are going to continue to evolve to provide us things that we never even dreamed of. Yes, will we manage our finances in the same way in the future? No. Are there professions that are going to disappear? Yes. But are there professions that are going to be augmented? I don't want stock advice from a robot. I want stock advice from somebody who has a human connection to me, but I want them using the AI tools to do synthesis in ways that they wouldn't today. Same in the medical field. I think, the successful doctors in the future are going to be using AI tools to diagnose or to assist in the diagnosis. But at the end of the day, I'm not looking to go to a robot doctor with a vanilla voice telling me that I have a serious disease. I'm going to want to talk with a human, because humans bring to each other a sympathy, a connection that we just don't have with electronic copilots.
If you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you know what I think about AI. I'm deeply excited about it, but I also see companies struggle with it. And you know that I think it's not primarily due to technical reasons. Compared to previous revolutions, let's call it the internet wave, part of why we struggled initially was that, the infrastructure wasn't built out. We didn't have online credit card payments and whatnot. But the difference with AI is that the infrastructure is already here. The technology is so much more capable than we actually use it right now. And the problem for most C-suites that I talk to, CEOs and senior managers, is that they know about the importance of AI, but they can't seem to get to that position where they truly understand, how is AI making me fundamentally more competitive? I understand that it can save costs, hours here and there, increase some productivity number, But how do I distinguish myself on my market? Like the ones that truly survived the digitalization era wasn't a bookstore that got a website. It was the Amazons of the world. So where you truly find the transformation of what we do today and how can we unlock things, serve customers that we never could, do innovations that weren't ever before practical, that type of innovation. The primary problem that I see, in all honesty, is that the C-suite, you don't really understand the technology. And not understanding the technology for the sake of understanding the technology, but for the sake of having a strategic discussion. So that's why I started Grail. I stand right smack dab in the middle of I understand the technology, I understand strategy and execution. And bringing these two together is what we do at Grail. So if you understand that this is something that needs to happen, then we should talk. Thing is, slots for this spring is already filling up. Grail has been in the works for some time, so I've already have engagement for the spring. But what I'm looking for is that one CEO in each market that truly wants to make a dent in the universe. So if you're that guy or that girl, please head over to Grail, that works, and let's talk.
Having said that, it's interesting on the kind of blind tests, especially on the ability to show empathy. And I know there's been studies done in the medical field that AI interactions score higher on the empathy test. And surprisingly to me, I think it was in McKinsey's latest AI at the workplace, one of the biggest use cases for AI is like personal partnership and therapy, which was completely unexpected to me.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because many of us fear, there's things we want to talk to a human about and there's things we are embarrassed to talk about to a human about.
Yeah.
So we've been asking Dr. Google everything for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I don't want to call a clinician and ask about stuff that I'm not so sure I want to describe this about myself. Many of us are shy in nature at some point. So therapy is a great example. And unfortunately, where a lot of these systems do fail is back to our driving example. We're okay blaming humans for 1.3 million traffic fatalities a year. We're not going to be okay blaming robots for that.
Yeah.
So, if we look at automated driving systems, whether we talk about Cruise, whether we talk about Uber, no one is out there has sustained their moment in the negative sun. When something occurs, every organization that is proliferated robots in safety-centric environments like driving has disappeared. So why should we believe that that's going to be different for Waymo here in the U.S.? I think culturally different. China might separate. Baidu had a major incident the other day that they seem the ability to move things in an authoritarian society like China forward, even with risks, is different. So I think people have a native tendency to allow humans to err, but at least today. And I think this will change over decades, we look at machines to be much more perfect. So my expectation from a robotic doctor is that is going to be perfect, whereas my expectation from a human is that this is a little of art blended with a little of science.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason we call it the medical arts and not the medical sciences, because medicine is a little art and a little science. If you move to robots, we're looking for science. So I think when you think about the use of robots for therapy and all, I think, there are applications there, but there's things that it's going to be missing and there's things that are going to be advancing. And it's probably a great case of a little of both is a much more optimal solution at either end.
Yeah, and I think handling the exceptions is also a really interesting point, and similar to your 1% when automation has failed from the automotive industry. So when it comes to making available like light level of therapy through chatbots, I think in general that's fantastic, right? But we also have cases where people are really sick and the chatbots are the complete wrong solution, right? And this is just one example.
Absolutely.
Obviously, this is going to be true across multiple modalities.
And the same's true on the clinician side. The human is not always right. But we're okay with humans being wrong. We're not, we as a society aren't really ready for machine error to cause harm to humans in the same way.
So I read, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who had an example around So traffic fatalities with deer accidents in the US is quite high. And a really good solution for that is to reintroduce some of the big cats into wild nature, with the potential downside that they steal a baby or two. And the number of babies that they steal will be lower than the traffic fatalities that they fix, right? But we're still not happy with the solution. So it's not just a robot versus, it's something more moral or philosophical going on there as well.
Yeah. And that, I think, will change over decades. So I think we will begin to trust robots. I mean, the Japanese society in particular has trusted robotics much more than a lot of the rest of the world.
Interesting.
And I think that will occur over time. So I think the concept of therapy robots has been in Japan for years. That'll occur around the rest of the world. It's just going to take time. We evolve. The machines tend to change quickly, but humans evolve over time. And for some of us, hey, we're lead adopters. We'll move a little faster. For many of us, we're tech laggers. And I've seen enough. It doesn't really help. Is it worth my time? So I do think we will change over time. But this is a tagline I've been talking about a little bit, and then especially around executives. We need to unlearn as much as we learn. History does tend to repeat itself, but that doesn't mean I want history to repeat itself. That means I need to unlearn some of that to relearn how I want the future to look differently. So being flexible, is really key to charting a new path, and at times sticking with that. And that's a little bit of the hard part of democracy versus the authoritarian cultures that are leading elements of development in the world right now. Sometimes we can't keep bouncing back and forth, playing ping pong with ourselves. Electric vehicles are a great debate these days. In the U.S., I like to think about a donkey and a mule playing ping pong with a climate future together. Either path would be fine if you stuck with it. But right now, we can't stick with things.
What are some really practical, you need to unlearn this type of advice, especially to leaders?
It wouldn't surprise me if 75% of major organizations out there still aren't using AI in ways that make sense. I had a phone call from a friend the other day, a multi-billion-dollar company, and they have not touched AI, and they don't allow their employees to touch AI. So they think we need to unlearn stuff like that quickly. Now, what's the tolerance? Where do we want to leverage these technologies? Lots of organizations still rely on pen and paper to do things. Pen and paper has been out for years, right? I write down notes because that still works for me, but many people, everything's digital these days. So there are value propositions to moving to that new society. Driving's another piece. We don't drive the old-fashioned way manually much anymore. I mean, there's a couple antique cars out there still, but why are we still building things that we drive the old-fashioned way? We need to be thinking about the mindset where we're really working collaboratively with different elements of automation and take that mindset forward. Not thinking about building cars the old-fashioned way, building cars that work with some degree of automation supporting us in different ways. Moving more and more from automating for the sake of technology to automating in ways that supports us as humans to do better. I think it's really moving from a tech-first mindset to a human-first mindset that is really critical for society today. And we've been on this juggernaut of tech-first for so long. But where do technology really work? It works where it solves a human purpose, to make people money, to save people money, to make life better. But not because it was just technology. It works because it helps us.
Have you written or thought a lot around kind of how we measure productivity for knowledge workers? Because I think this is part of the equation as well. So it's when you look at the return on investment for AI, it's so easy to fall down into the kind of cheap cost saving automation things because it's very short-term provable here and now. But I don't think it's necessarily the road to the great value of AI. Rather, potentially the opposite. It's something that plateaus really, really quickly, and there's no competitive moat around it. But making the bigger bets that's more capability building, let's say, you probably have a way longer horizon before you see the returns.
So, yes. And I think it's one of the key pieces in how to make AI useful. My new book with Magnus is the real power of AI and is its inability to amplify human expertise. I agree with you. This automate away, reduce workforce component is really short-term thinking. Some things are always going to remain human. there is a role for human judgment with the machines that's going to evolve. It's not what the human's role was in 1980. It's going to be something very different. But the real power of AI and technology is to amplify our skills to work more effectively with computers. That doesn't mean automation doesn't take certain things away from me. It sorts my email. It censors information coming to me. Spam filters have been around for years. It's just a whole lot better now. But the ability to amplify my productivity, maybe the concept of a 35-hour week isn't wrong. What are we living for? Are we living to work or are we living to live? Many of us are working to live. So if you could use this automation to make us a little more productive and justify a little more of life, oh my God, would that be great? I mean, I enjoy what I do work-wise, but I enjoy what I do in the weekends even more with my kids. Otherwise, why would you have kids? So I think that the power of amplifying human skill is where we need to be focused. And I think organizations and leaders in particular who focus their organizations on amplifying the expertise of their workforce or building tools that amplify their consumers' capabilities, those are the organizations that are going to win best over the long haul.
What are the early decisions from a senior leader that is stepping down the augment, the super worker, the capability building path?
Technology always evolves faster than our institutions, and in many cases, our egos. But the success point is where there's utility to either creating new business product, making us money, finding small savings. Big savings usually don't work out. It's shaving things off the edges that work. Moving from the foundations that society has been pitching around automation to augmentation, to support, letting AI handle the small, tedious tasks humans are really not good at. Shifting transmissions, having two hands, putting all your strength in turning the wheel. Okay. Remembering to turn the thermostat down every night. Okay. We remember 9 out of 10 nights, just not 10 out of 10 nights. Okay. Remembering that most failures in AI are not really technical. The AI does what it was programmed to do. They're human. So, the systems have to be well thought out before you can automate them. And this is why automated driving has been, a few years out for 20 years now or more. I mean, our first, the first news items on automated driving are 100 years ago. Is that, implementation, integration, and imagination matter more than the models to drive this stuff. So we need to think out of the box, not think about replacing us.
Earlier on, we talked about like what are the human skills to double down on. Would you say that the smartest path is to kind of look for your strengths or your weaknesses to start to augment?
That's a really good question. And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. Some of us on strengths one day and weaknesses another day, some of us more weaknesses than strengths. But I think in different roles, you're looking for different things. So, in software design, mitigating errors and mitigating weaknesses for some climates may be more important than improving productivity and strengths. In other climates, thinking out of the box, the strengths are really to work on more. So I think this is where modern leadership needs to start thinking to employee development. Look, it's no mystery. We don't come out of school with all the skills needed to manage our strengths and weaknesses effectively in the workplace or in life. Many of us need support in different ways. Look, executive coaches have existed for years to help some leaders get stronger and some of us improve weaknesses in our leadership structure. So I think that we need to be thinking about the use of AI on both of those angles. And very much creating, this is where some of these new roles are going to occur. The coaches needed to help us make those decisions of where do I want to fit, enhancing my strengths, improving my weaknesses, and how do I use these tools effectively integrated into my workful's.
Yeah, because I was thinking about my own
easy binary.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, we look for easy binary decisions. It's A or B. And in many cases, it's A and B.
Yeah. Now, I was thinking back to my own path and the years that has gone, because I think I've been leveraging down things that I already was quite strong at. Because those things are also easier from a motivational standpoint. I get better at what I'm already good at. I double down on my competitive advantage. So for me, AI mostly is for a thinking partner. Thinking deeper, getting more context, more research into my thinking, applying tons of different strategic frameworks or innovation frameworks to questions. And these were already things that I was quite good at. But I, I would almost say, like, if I was sitting with somebody who was completely new at AI, that would probably be a pretty good framework because it keeps you engaged, a reason to come back. Whereas I think most automations focus on our weaknesses in a sense.
The word you used, partnership, is really critical here.
Yeah.
You know, I now have a partnership with electronic support in ways that I had partnerships with human support in the past. So you look to communicate something publicly, you went to your communications team for edits, you went back and forth 5 times and to improve and shape something. Now, my first step is to go to my electronic co-pilot, get refinements from there, and then go to preferably a smaller communications team for, I need a human check that I'm really meeting all the pieces that I thought I was meeting. Because I still want that human checkpoint in there. But maybe I don't need a communications team made of 20. I only need a communications leader made of 1 or 2. Yeah. Okay, where does other roles go? Well, those roles go, optimally to creating more honed content. Unfortunately, as we see the statistics these days, God knows what percentage, whether it's 50%, 75%, and 90% of content online is AI generated now. But as opposed to AI augmented or AI, co-pilot, co-created. So I think we need to be thinking about whether it is a pure regression to the mean based upon AI's ability to interpret everything that was given, or something that came from human creativity.
One of the things, being very practical here, that I got a lot of value out of was spending a lot of time kind of categorizing together with AI what are the patterns of my thinking. So whenever I approach a new question, how do I approach it? What are the really like hallmark for Johan's brain type of things, and produce a pretty hefty like context file. And that context file I can reuse for so many different things. So that was, to me, something that was surprisingly valuable. And I feel in general that I now, at the end of 25, building up these new systems becomes increasingly fast because I've built a lot of stuff before. So like it's super difficult in the beginning, and then understanding good prompting. But now building up a new Claude project for something super specific is like half an hour because I have so many templates to work off of.
I'm a ChatGPT user, and the memory of what I've done in the past. Have I ever written something like this? I can't remember what I wrote a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
I can go searching for hours on that, and yes, you have. No, you haven't. Synergistic articles may be A and B. Okay, it's just a modern embodiment of search that is at hyperspeed. So, these are the ways that we can begin to augment. And, I've been thinking about this morning. It's a little differently than stuff before, and it's connecting these synapses for me in ways that we just couldn't before. So I think we're among the leaders here, though. I think there's a whole lot of folks out there that are just exploring the nuances. And I think there's a whole nother large swath of the population that is scared of these tools being able to do what they really can do. And the longer folks stay away from them, it's much like when the advent of the personal computer showed up in the 80s, the folks that weren't embracing learning this quickly were folks that were left behind for years. Some of them caught back up, but it took time.
I think there's a lot of fear there as well, almost like deer in the headlights syndrome going on. Like, it's so scary. I see my own, all of my capabilities being automated so quickly. So it's so crazy to think about. So I freeze. And I think probably that's true for quite a lot of people, sadly. Again, coming back to the kind of senior leader audience. So there's a balance between rushing ahead, implementing things without proper forethought into safety standard or security practices or whatever it might be. So you say, okay, we should probably approach this a little bit more thoughtfully, but that's also being used, I feel, as an excuse not to do anything, if that makes sense. Where do you feel like how far should you have come as an enterprise to not clearly be behind the kind of the average enterprise by this point?
That's an important point. I think there are a lot of organizations that are far too in on the AI financial bubble of today. I think they've gone way too far over the edge in their investments, and the ROI required on those investments it's quite frankly not going to occur.
It's like the actual investment in ChatGPT, for example.
ChatGPT is just one of those. I think there are many other organizations out there that spent just fortunes, and when you think about the math of the ROI, it would have to be so massive that and what's important about that math is that it's kind of assuming the technology is not going to evolve from here fast enough. And I think that the reality is what OpenAI has done with ChatGPT, somebody else will create something else that we don't even know the framing of the letters of associated with now, much like, large language models and chatbots revolutionized things a few years ago. Someone else at some point, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years or 20 years from now, will do that. And some organizations will become new IBMs, establishing themselves and lasting 100 years. And some organizations will look more like Yahoo. The brand will survive, but nothing else really there. And look, I think about Alphabet right now. It's a great illustration of a company. Is it going to become another IBM, or is it going to become another Yahoo? And I don't think anybody knows. So if I'm a leader today and in an organization, I'm really thinking about starting small, scaling smart, and piloting AI narrowly. I want to know it's going to work for specific use cases strategically, whether that's customer service, whether that's coding, before accelerating the expenditures into mission critical roles or large scale adoption. I think there's just too much rush of we have to do something, we have to do it faster, as opposed to a real thought about what are the processes I'm looking to solve. Now, if you are a small startup, you can do that process solution step, creating something new much easier than if you're, P&G, Autoliv, Volvo. Big companies need to slow down and think strategically. We tend to be so operationally focused that we have to execute quickly. If we forget the strategic steps, okay, what are we trying to do? Why? How can this work? Can we prove it before I spend $1 billion on this implementation? I also think that goes hand in hand with fostering trust and transparency in your organization, not hiding that we're looking to use or using AI, making it visible, setting the guidance needed that folks feel empowered to use what's okay in their organization. So there's a lot of folks in organizations using ChatGPT on their phone because their organization won't let them use it. Whether that's in academia or that's in professional societies. We need to build the trust that we're using tools and we're thinking about really smartly how they can fill holes. They're not going to transform and change everything we do overnight. It's going to take time. That may be a year, that may be 2, that may be 5 or 10, but very few technologies are like a light switch, all of a sudden just transforming society so simply.
If we were to summarize 2025 from the AI and in the enterprise space, what was the completely expected outcomes and what was the unexpected outcomes?
So the completely expected outcome to me is that this balloon keeps being pumped fuller and fuller of hot air and overinvestment. But I think to me, there's a shift. The unexpected is there's an embracement and shift in the populace and its use of AI tools occurring. People are seeing value in what they can do and what they can help with. I think people are starting to move beyond this synthesized list of information that search used to provide to looking for, information that they can actionize more effectively. I think 2026 becomes the year we focus on the human's role and really human-centric AI. After years of so over-focusing on the technological advancements, I think the new frontier in 26 becomes the human factor here.
Yeah.
Okay, we can get better. So I think organizations that are leading here will recognize the competitive advantage doesn't come from deploying more AI to replace humans. It comes from deploying useful AI that enhances the capabilities of their teams and their consumers.
I think that's a super interesting point in itself. So the more familiar and almost to the point of experts people get with these tools, I see two major shifts. One is, as a consequence of the technology, you start reflecting way more about the essence of humanity. And I think that's like a brilliant thing that I didn't see. And the second point is kind of ethical concerns, at least for me, and the downstream consequences of a kind of robo-centric implementation of AI on our society. And on the one hand, it's great that a lot of like the senior voices, and now I'm not talking about the kind of automation bros on LinkedIn, but the actual credible voices, right? On the one hand, it's great that we're raising more of these concerns and starting talking about it. On the other hand, I think it's kind of scary because it also means that those things are very hidden from plain sight. So a implementation of this technology that isn't thoughtful carries pretty negative externalities just moved 2-3 years out.
Yeah, well, under this, move towards a human-centered framework, and I think 2026. I think it's the year of human again, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And I think that you're going to look for a better understanding of what AI should do for us.
Mm.
I think that the fundamental question is moving beyond the fascination of technology to thinking about, is AI generally useful and where? And that really revolves around, a lot of the thought points. And when Magnus and I started putting together how to make AI useful, our goal was to start thinking about what's future, what's that look like?
Because it's also a question of how do we integrate with this technology in a not just useful way, but actually healthy way? Because we don't want to implement AI in the same sense that we implemented the social media, for example, where it's something that's completely everywhere and everybody seems to kind of agree on that this is a mostly horrible thing, but it's very like intuitive to us as humans. And I think AI carries very similar traits, right? That it's very intuitive to move down a path of atrophy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you look at the cover of Time magazine. The person of the year is AI.
Yeah.
But I think the person of the year in 2026 is 180 degrees from that. It's a human. The role of a human, we need to get back to. Why are we here? We're here to live. We're here to do. We're here to enjoy. And technology can enable that. It doesn't necessarily need to replace that. And I think that's where that human-centric aspect of AI really shines, is that let AI do what it does best to help us do better. And just moving out of the tech-first mindset to a human-first mindset. And once we do that, I should rephrase that. If we can do that, I think we will find new prosperity in society. If we continue to push forward with this tech-first mindset, we will never find the usefulness to us in the same way that really improves human life as we know it.
It's interesting. You talked about a 35-hour work week before. From a individual's perspective, that'd be awesome, right? But I wonder how the politicians of the world look at this, because it's kind of dangerous as well to if we're in a global economy where we need to compete with everyone, right? And we make a fantastic decision for the humans of our society, but at the expense of the economy of the society. Like, is this realistic? What's your real? Because I love the worldview that you're painting, that 2026 will be about the humans. I would love if that happened. What's the realistic outlook on that question?
Look, the realistic side is that you have lived in Sweden for some time. While the weather is far from perfect during 9 months of the year, it's gorgeous during the summer. The reality is the Swedes take an enormous part of that summer off. And Swedish summer is 4 to 6 weeks, but they come back retuned to think more effectively. So we can look at, the balance of an overstressed American populace that works constantly and looks forward to a long holiday break of a whopping week versus the Europeans and some of the Nordic cultures where, a more rest is built into our cultures. And you say, at the end of the day, look at some of the Swedish unicorns with far less capital than Silicon Valley. There's some innovative companies from Spotify to Lovable that are just growing in Stockholm these days. Why? Because it can be balanced more effectively. And obviously the French have been on a 35-hour work week for some time. And many of the world looks at the French as lazy. And just at the end of the day, maybe the French have a better look on the value of why we're here. We are blessed, if for many of us, with the opportunity to live and to do. And some people work for work. That's life. Most of us are working to live. Even if we incredibly enjoy what we do to work, it's working to live. So how do we find that new balance? And is AI the tool that uncorks that? And to me, that's where the possibilities of technology lie, is helping us do better. And if that's not a 35-hour work week, that's just improving transportation safety by magnitudes, that's fine too. Or making the simple things of cooking dinner and finding the ingredients I need even easier, because, yes, grocery shopping becomes automated. It's one of the mundane things that I hate every day. I wish, I do like the delivery services, but I need it by the minute because I never remember that I want spice A or spice B. And all of a sudden I'm out of it.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good point. And it's easy to kind of take that into your own life, right? Just work more isn't necessarily the best answer to get the best output of your life. Like periods of taking a step back, periods of reflection. I think a lot of high performers the last 5 years has discovered meditation, for example, as a brilliant example, how to get to the kind of essence and the clarity of what needs doing, not just we need to do stuff, right?
Very rarely will you find an individual who says, wish I worked more.
Yeah, you have that aspect as well.
You come back and say, okay, the expertise says, I wish I lived more. We are only on this planet for a short period of time. How do we make that most useful? And AI can be a partner that really, to me, accelerates that. So I think that, look, do I really feel that AI, in human-centered AI, is going to be the prediction, for 26? I darn hope it will. And I hope we get out of the Silicon Valley mindset that Musk, Jensen, and others are pushing of tech. Well, there's a reason they're pushing it. They're going to make money with that. The corporations are going to win there. But at the end of the day, we should be, as human species, asking for more. We want the technology to support us to be better. Otherwise, why are we continuing to invest here? And I do think that companies out there, NVIDIA is a great example. NVIDIA can do really well in a human-centric world too. Maybe it's not quite as good as a centric world that aims to automate everything in the next quarter. But over the long haul, look, if GPUs are the answer to neural networks, NVIDIA is going to do fine and dandy. But we can do that being much more focused on societal issues in the balance.
In Europe, we have a lot of like really family-run businesses that have been around for 100 years or so. They're looking right now like the big losers on AI because they really haven't done anything. I hope that part of the answer to why that is just because what you're saying, we need to integrate the values of this company into the plays that we're making. We want to ensure that we're not just profitable this quarter, but that we can take care of our employees. And a lot of these more value-driven companies might, if you play this out, I'm being a little bit optimistic here, I think, but this is how I want to think at least. If you play this out, it's more about understanding what can AI do for us as a company over time rather than just to technology. So perhaps even though Europe right now is looking like the biggest loser in the international race between US and China, maybe it's something that will end up quite positive for Europe.
I think that's possible. I think there's regulatory efforts in Europe that are problematic as well. And GDPR, data protection, is the European AI Privacy Act.
Data access.
You're not necessarily data access is data is modern gold. And I do think we need to be looking at frameworks that allow data to be used more effectively. Healthcare data is a great example of all the health privacy laws are not allowing us to do what the Israelis did during COVID, modeling trajectories of disease in ways that are prevented when we own our data versus society can leverage our data. Not that I believe my name should be attached to that data, but there's elements of my health profile, my financial profile that can help society at large. And quite frankly, when it is being used to the positive, proactive of presenting disease, managing disease, public health in general, I have a lot better feelings of consenting and letting my data be used. So maybe, GDPR can't change, but my ability to simply consent and donate my data, much like a blood bank, could enable that. So I do think actually Europe's going to come out more ahead in the long term, because I think slow and steady tends to win this race. I think these large capital investments in the US and China, they'll work out in some specific situations, but the bubble is going to burst in ways that the Europeans may be a little more protected from. Now, if you can tell me which organizations in Silicon Valley are going to be best positioned when the bubble goes pop, I think that you're clearly betting on the right stock portfolios, and you probably should be talking here. You should probably be spending your time on Wall Street. I think the AI fundamental technologies are more like a balloon. They're going to go up and down over time. We need to find those use cases. I think your smaller organizations that are thinking strategically forward are really aligning themselves with that philosophy I told you earlier. Start small, scale smart, and pile narrow. We can't take the risks of looking for transformational investments that potentially saddle our companies with debt that we can't afford over the long haul. I mean, that is what Silicon Valley is doing right now. Debt loads that are monstrosities, trying to bet on we have to be the survivor of the fact. I don't think there is a survivor. There are multiple survivors. But I do think there are some organizations that are bread and butter brands right now that will look more like Yahoo, AOL, than IBM and Microsoft.
And it's interesting when we speak about the AI bubble, there's a lot of talk around the AI bubble right now. I think, again, you talked about we have a preference for like binary thinking, right? It's a bubble or it's not a bubble. I think if you nuance it down to looking at that this is actually multiple different things, you have the valuation bubble. There I completely agree with you that it's pretty reasonable that we'll see a lot of the investments into the AI companies burst. But then you have the infrastructure that's being built. So even though the bubble actually bursts, a lot of the infrastructure is still left, right? And can be used cheaply by whatever comes next. And you talked about how we, like the chatbots aren't probably the final evolution of it. And I read a really interesting example of this, how I think it was back in the early 1900s, there was a bubble in the bicycle industry. And during that bubble, there was a tremendous amount of investments that fundamentally, like tube, steel, and ball bearings, a lot of things got invented in the kind of bubble frenzy, right? Bubble popped, but what it enabled fundamentally was Henry Ford and the car revolution later on, because you had all of these technology already available and cheap and so forth. And I think that's probably going to be the case for AI as well, that the chatbots that we see today it's the evolution that we see now, probably not the final evolution, right? And then you have a completely different time scale, which it's about the human capability building side of things, right? That has nothing to do with the financial bubble, right? How I actually use AI and how we train our leaders and organizations. That runs whether you have a bubble or not, right?
And I firmly agree. Look, I think the technology is a balloon. It's going to go up and down. I think we'll find new uses for the technology. We'll find new uses for the infrastructure. I'm betting that what many of the server farms are being built for right now is not what they'll actually be used for. What's interesting is, will they have the value of dollar for dollar or more, or at the end of the day, they're really sold for pennies on the dollar? You can bet that again. We're having the wrong conversation, but I don't think anybody knows. I think the investments are being made kind of blindly. We have to keep up with the Joneses being the model, as opposed to, okay, we do have a long-term value proposition for our shareholders here. Look, the joke around the U.S. is, in much of the financial world is a lot of these companies have not figured out, they're investing in AI, but they haven't figured out how to make money in AI. You can't invest without having an ROI in mind.
Mm.
We're seeing expenditure levels that just don't make sense. We will find ROI. It just may have nothing to do with the companies that are investing in the infrastructure today.
Yeah, that's interesting. And talking about OpenAI as an example, like the business model is kind of shaky, right? Because you have your core product gets, I don't know how much better each year, 40 times better per year or something like that in raw compute, but the cost goes down like 8-9 times. Like that's a pretty scary business model. I don't know how that's sustainable.
We don't know inside Sam Altman's mind what their ultimate goal is. I mean, look,
Yeah.
is the ultimate goal of OpenAI to provide a new search engine that transforms the internet economy and economics away from Google, who's owned so much for so long, or is it to coexist and provide people a new experience? And Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot all exist in unison, much like operating systems. Where are they going strategically? We don't have a window there. I wish we were using this as an opportunity to reinvent away from the ad-driven economy of the internet, but I fear ads,
Mm.
much like Netflix and Amazon Prime's, ads will be back.
Yeah.
I wish it were true, but I suspect that they will be shaping us in new ways as OpenAI looks for new revenue streams in interesting ways that they're subliminally putting information in front of me all over the place.
Yeah, that's such a scary proposition. I wasn't actually aware of that until they did the code red, that they pulled back the kind of push towards an ad model in ChatGPT. But that to me is super scary. Like the persuasive nature of these models and then introduce the ad-driven revenue model. Ugh, that's pretty scary.
I mean, look, most of us don't realize how much negotiation is going on in the back room for our attention. I mean, you click and you search for something, is that there's a negotiation going on for fractions of cents on what ads to put in front of us.
Yeah.
It is a whole economy in the background functioning around, pulling and driving and pushing our attention.
Outside of the year of the human, what are some predictions for 26? It's been a lot of talk around agentic AI during 25. And then once we've starting to try to industrialize and scale the kind of proof of concepts, agentic has been quite difficult, even for the early adopters. Where do you see that going?
Look, agentic is just automation by a different name to me. I mean, it's a cool name, but we're trying to automate a lot there. And I think that we are moving too far on the automation side, and a lot of folks have views of agentic AI. Again, it's a cool name, so it really rings well. But these are bots beginning to make decisions for us. And are there applications where that works? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, many business decisions are made upon relationships. Relationships make some of the strongest business decisions because, I'm negotiating for a product sale and I know I need to get this done before the Christmas holidays. And, Johan, we've always worked well together. How do we get this done today? So this is offer, okay, win-win from both sides.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the integration of lots of database backbones, but our experiences and our personal relationships that drive business. Agentic AI is kind of we're just trying to automate a lot of way there. And I'm not saying that there's not areas that fits really well, but we're just looking beyond the human's role a little bit there, a little too far. Honestly, I don't think, I think agentic AI is just another tool in the quiver. I mean, all of these technologies are really cool, but they are tools that are often talked about well outside of their functional capabilities. It's almost like a universal screwdriver that's going to solve everything. The reality is we still need different size screwdrivers and different shaped screwdrivers for different applications. And AI tools are no different. Each of these tools has values and limitations.
Yeah.
And the next new tool comes across and it's going to solve everything for us. No, it's not. It just has positives and negatives. The deep learning, out of vogue right now, right? These deep learning models that are solving lots of interesting problems out there today, but we don't talk about it. It's just, that's yesterday's news.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we think about 26 more, I I do think it's the year where the financial components start to get scrutinized to a greater degree. I mean, trees don't grow to heaven. The financial markets are quite high on AI. Can this really continue for another couple of years? Probably not. I think global economic slowing will shape this. I think we're going to see some moderate size pullbacks in workforce that will be blamed on AI, much like Amazon laid off 30,000 last year and said it's about AI. I think that's about economic slowing, efficiencies in different directions. It's not all about AI, but I think we're going to see a lot of blaming on AI in 26. Easiest way to deal with the political forces globally is say the technology is working, it's great, we're investing well, keep our stock price up, but we're going to reduce our man count. That's again short-term thinking. So I think that's going to be a big headline in 26. So AI is going to, the headline is going to be AI is replacing workforces, but the reality is that there's much more fundamental underpinnings under there.
Do you see, I know this is probably not your area of expertise, but we haven't seen that much movement in the kind of legal area during 25. We haven't seen big class action lawsuits from copyright infringement or the 30,000 employees at Amazon being laid off and what happens when these companies, as we saw with Klarna, for example, they were quite early with these kind of massive AI-related layoffs, and then they realized, hey, this doesn't really work as we intended it, so we started hiring people back? Or do you think that there will be so much political protection around the AI investments, for example, from the Trump administration, that we won't really see that much happening on the legal space?
I don't think you're going to see the legal sides. While there are clear copyright issues that have been decided in courts and others to go, the workforce reductions everybody's expecting AI is going to help reduce the workforce. I mean, this is the expectation that automation is going to work. So why, we've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years now, right? So, or longer. I think multiple organizations are realizing the fact that simple storyline doesn't really work in reality, but in terms of the philosophical view, it'll stick. I don't think we're going to see massive, it's hard to sue that you automated away my job. That's not going to work so well. I don't think that's going to work under the Trump administration either. I think that, one thing AI is going to do is provide performance metrics that are much more copacetic that allows us to highlight the performance elements we're interested in and deprioritize the performance elements we're not. I think that our ability to put a performance metric on any individual, again, what performance metrics are right, which ones are wrong, and doing so from a less biased way than we ever would have before. Yes, AI has biases, but so do humans. There's don't mystify the fact that an HR department or a leader comes without bias. They come with a lot of bias. Of how they were educated, how they were built, what was the structure they grew up on, what's their philosophy and culture. That's all bias. It's human bias.
Yeah. And there's a lot of human bias, and it comes kind of back to your idea of we're more fine with humans making mistakes than we are robots from earlier in this conversation.
Look, we look at traffic enforcement and we worry about the bias of who the law enforcement is going to pull over, but we're even more concerned with the bias of how the machine intelligence may take it.
Absolutely.
There's a traffic camera, and I believe in the US the other day, that issued a couple thousand tickets because the speed limit number in the traffic camera was wrong.
Okay.
It's simple. Simple. This machine, this is programmer error, no big deal. It's just laughing at how programmer error in an automated system you can create, God knows how much trauma of how many 18-year-old kids got traffic tickets and their parents screaming at them how they can get a traffic ticket when the reality is it wasn't my fault. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking when we talked about like the idea of an atrophying brain, like I don't know if I were to be would be able to be as effective in my role as I was before ChatGPT came, now having experienced ChatGPT.
That's because the two of us are examples of individuals who are moving and leveraging these tools as co-pilots in life to advance what we're capable of doing on a daily basis.
100%.
We're not relegating to the robot. We're using the robot as a collaborator. Now, quite frankly, I'll frame it to you this way. Without ChatGPT, you would have had a team of 20 and needed funding levels to create what you're doing now.
100%.
That now you're able to automate and do faster. You as an individual are doing more leveraging the electronic expertise that you would never have been able to use in human expertise because you never could afford it. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
It's how do we use the electronic expertise to accelerate what we can do for society? And that's because we're both, fast thinking performers who are trying to invent the future, as opposed to individuals that are showing up at work every day to do an engineering job or a job that they're, they might enjoy, but they're not trying to reinvent themselves overnight using every tool imaginable around them.
That's fantastic. Hey, to close this this conversation out, what is the one most important advice that you'd give to like the individual? Like what's the New Year's resolution to get the most out of AI for 2026 to make?
I think that the New Year's resolution is learn to play more. There is no textbook on how to really use these tools. When we are children, we go to sandboxes, we learn to play in a sandbox, we experiment, we play, we try to create things that we never imagined because we never saw them before. We watched another person, we learned a little bit from them. But create safe, low risk environments for you either personally or your team to experiment with AI and new technologies that have very minimal, if any, financial fallout, but allow us to think and recreate how these tools can help support us effectively. Not replace us, augment us, but it's all back to the foundations of we learn through play. We learn really well by playing. That's the only way we're going to explore where these technologies can really help us. By the time folks academically study these technologies, there'll be a new round of technologies that is well beyond. So if you want to benefit in 2026 from the evolution of AI, start playing. Use your holiday period to ask Claude, ask Gemini, ask ChatGPT or Copilot new and interesting questions. Have a couple jam sessions on a topic that's cool and interesting, especially one you know a lot about, because then you can begin to think about whether it's right, whether it's wrong, understanding that AI, much like humans, has an opinion. It's built upon human expertise, so why would you expect it to be perfect? It's going to hallucinate, much like each of us do. We base things upon what we know and we evolve from there. And the same is true for the AI engines. So when you play with things you can begin to say, clearly basketball is not played like that. That's an interesting area where it's thinking beyond. Let's ask it about that. Let's start questioning it much like a human.
Fantastic. Bryan, thank you so much for coming on. This was fascinating to take part of. A lot of nuggets of wisdom. And I really do hope that 2026 becomes the year of the human. That sounds like a brilliant thing to aim at.
I think that would be the best thing for society in general, as we think about us, as opposed to it's all about technology. At the end of the day, let's use technology to help us as a human species and a human race evolve. And that's why we started inventing things. It wasn't to replace us. It was to help us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a good note to end on for the theme, how to make AI useful. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you.
And there, we're at the end of the episode. I think it's so amazing that almost 70% of you actually listen to the end of the episodes, especially for long format. I'm so thankful for that. Like the engagement numbers is fantastic. Before we leave each other, two things. First off, this episode was sponsored by Grail, and I'll make no secret about it. Grail is the company that I'm starting. So it's the future of AI, and how can we unlock value that's not just automation, but actually building towards a future that we want to live in, like a future where I want to work, augmentation. So head over to grail.works to know more. Secondly, I'd appreciate so much that you listen to this podcast. But even though 70% listen to the end, almost 70% are not subscribed either. So if you can give a like button and subscribe to all my channels, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok apparently. We have an awesome webpage. There's so much more content, like yes, the reels and so forth. But what I really would like to push for is that every week I publish a long format article. which is the pinnacle of my thinking. So it's the most interesting thing that I come across that week, either in podcasts or in other endeavors. And I try to write about it towards you, a senior leader. Like, what is the crucial takeaway from the most important part of my week, let's say. I publish that on LinkedIn and on my webpage, thinkroompodcast.com. Thank you so much, and see you next time.